Good morning, guys. Today I'll give you a brief presentation here on taxonomy, aka why do we use scientific names. And if you look in this upper corner here, you see where it says the oak collection. So what we're going to talk about a little bit here today is how do you identify a species, and more importantly, how do you properly write its scientific name. So here we go. Let's forget this. Moving on. All right. So this story begins with a dude named Carl Linnaeus. He's a big name. He's up there with other folks that we've covered like Darwin and Mendel. And this dude was a Swedish botanist. So what you got to remember here is that those countries in Europe, for the most part, are smaller than Texas. So nations have borders, right? But species typically do not. So I gave you an example here. I use the word Scots pine, right, which is a species of pine tree found throughout Europe and into Asia. Okay, but I speak English. That's why I call it Scots pine. But obviously in Germany and Italy and other countries, right, they have different words for it. So someone like Linnaeus, who was perhaps working with other scientists and naturalists throughout Europe, they all had different names for this species. So that would have made this process of identification and study rather difficult. So Linnaeus took it upon himself to come up with a system where every organism had a scientific name or a Latin-based name, where it wouldn't matter if you were speaking Japanese or English or whatever. You would have some kind of common dialogue. So here we go. Let's move on, right? So you see the last two words there, Pinus sylvestris. That became the scientific word. Usually these words are in Latin, every once in a while in Greek, okay? But once again, this became universal. So it doesn't matter what your language is or your ethnicity and whatnot. Everyone has the same scientific name, so we can study something systematically and universally. All right. Now, kind of backtracking a little bit here, common names oftentimes stink. Okay, so I gave you an example here of a bird called a robin, right? So when the British were coming over back in the colonial days and pre-colonial days, really, there was a little bird here in America they called it rather a robin because they thought it was the same species of the bird back home. So what you see on the right in those pictures there, on the right you have the American robin. That's what we call it today. And on the left is the unrelated bird that's kind of similar looking because of the orange color on its breast. That's called the European robin or English robin. But again, if I said I'm studying a robin, what exactly does that mean, right? It can mean, in this case, two different birds. So that's why, going back to the previous slide, that's why a scientific name would make this more at least easier to understand if you're studying it from that standpoint. Here's another example, one that I like. If you guys recall, I'm a weird mountain lion fanatic, but it's kind of the same story. So when those English folks were coming over back in the day, on occasion they would see these mountain lions, right? And they thought, in some cases, that these were actual like lions from Africa, like the females, the lionesses. So sometimes you would hear the word American lion. However, there was actually another cat called the American lion that went extinct during the Ice Age. So the word American lion is rather confusing. But to kind of further complicate the matter, the range of this large cat went all across North America, at least at one time it did, and it went in all the way into South America as well, where it overlapped its range and habitat with another large cat called the jaguar, right? So throughout its range, different civilizations throughout this early America had different names for this cat. So that's why in the Northeast at one time they used the word catamount, which is kind of outdated today. No one uses that word, primarily because there are no mountain lions in the Northeast, but I digress. So some people called it a catamount. Other parts of the country called it a puma. Some folks called it a cougar. And then, like I said, I usually just use the term mountain lion. Furthermore, a lot of indigenous Native American tribes in North America and South America alike have their own regional names for this cat. So again, if I was saying cougar or American lion or catamount or whatever, that's kind of confusing when I could just say Felis concolor, the scientific name, okay? And another one that's an early American example that sometimes people use this word today, buffalo, right? A buffalo is an old world animal. It is an African animal, right? The animal that was native here is really a bison. So two different animals. They're distantly related, but two different animals nonetheless. So if I said I'm studying a buffalo, I probably should use a scientific name to be more specific. Here's another one, the word buzzard. So when those folks from Europe were coming over back in the day, they were mistakenly using the word buzzard because they thought the turkey vultures that we had here, they thought that those were a European hawk, which is called a buzzard. So a buzzard and a turkey vulture are two unrelated species entirely. But again, I hope you get the point why common names can be confusing when you can just have a scientific name that makes it more specific, okay? And I gave you, I'm kind of sticking to Texas here. Here's another Texas example. You see three different fish there going from left to right. You have one called a bonito. In the middle there, you have a Jack Crevalle. I once caught a 33-pound Jack Crevalle out of Port Aransas, one of the biggest fish I've caught. And then finally on the right is one called a ladyfish. Well, all of these fish have different nicknames, and one of the nicknames for all of them is a skipjack. So if I was a marine biologist and I said, hey, I'm going to study a skipjack, well, that's awfully confusing. So I probably should have the scientific name so we know which fish or which population or whatever the case is, which one we are studying. Kind of getting back to Linnaeus's problem when different species didn't know borders and languages and whatnot. Even in Texas, there's another example here, and some of you here might have seen these two plants. Like sometimes they're grown in people's yards and whatnot. On the left, you have yellow bells. On the right, you have purple sage. But both these species aren't just found in Texas; they're also found in Mexico. So sometimes the yellow bells is called Esperanza, and similarly, a purple sage oftentimes is called Cenizo. So if I was working with a Spanish-speaking ecologist and I said I'm going to study yellow bells, that's probably really confusing for him when I could just say Tacoma sands. Or in the case of purple sage, I could just say Leucophyllum frutescens, and now we were all kind of on the same page without trying to guess what language is which and so forth, all right? So I hope that kind of clears up a thing or two about scientific names. Now let's kind of dive in a little bit deeper, and if you look at that second bullet there, we'll talk about the entire classification system, okay? So again, this is something Linnaeus did. He took groups from broad to specific, and like I said, you're going to have to memorize this. I hate using the word memorize, but I'll give you some hints in the next couple of slides, all right? So you got kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, okay? So kingdom, that could be that's a broad category, right? Like bacteria, plants, fungi, animals, and then of course there's one that von Leeuwenhoek helped discover, if you recall, the protist or protozoans. Okay, so let's kind of move on. All right, here we go. Okay, so I said I'll give you a couple hints. Do you like acronyms? So King Philip came over for great spaghetti. Like I've always said, man, I'm the king of dumb hints, and that's as dumb as it gets, but good golly, you will remember that. And if you can't remember that, well, I'm sorry, dude. I am sorry. But anyways, King Philip came over for a great spaghetti. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Yo, here we go. Moving on. And let's talk about dogs, right? So what kingdom is it? Right? It's an animal. Well, but like you see in the notes there, lots of things are animals. Insects are animals. Jellyfish are animals. So let's kind of move on here. Kingdom, phylum. So now we're getting a little more specific. The phylum is chordate, and I'll keep this really, really, really simple for now. Just think of animals that have spinal cords. So that eliminates the jellyfish and the insects. So now we have a more specific group that includes fish, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and mammals and such. But now we move on. Class, okay? So these are the animals that have fur and nurse their young. Okay, so if you guys recall, I think I said this once or twice earlier last semester, the word mammal is derived from the Latin word mama, which means breast. So that's kind of tying in with the fact that we or the females rather, nurse their young. Moving on, now we can get more specific because there's all sorts of different mammals. You have the grazers like cows and deer and such. But then you also have some predators. And so here you have an order called carnivora. I just put carnivore, I kind of kept it simple. But there are lots of animals that fit into this category. You have the canines, the dogs, wolves, and so forth, bears, the ursids, and felines, which are your cats and wolverines, and a few others. So we can kind of eliminate that. We're not talking about cats and bears and such. We're talking about canines, dogs. So that's our family. But under that family name, see, we're getting more and more specific, right? So under that family name, you've got wolves, coyotes, and foxes, and a couple of others. Finally, you get to genus and species, all right? So foxes actually belong to a different genus, that's Vulpes. So here you have coyotes and all your wolves. They're all, and the dogs included, they're part of the same genus, Canis. And specifically, dogs are Canis lupus, whereas a coyote is Canis latrans. See, coyotes and dogs are related, but they're different species. And do you guys recall, what does it mean to be a species? That means you can breed, reproduce with your own kind. So even though coyotes and dogs are related, again, part of the same genus, part of the same family, they're closely related, but they cannot reproduce together, which maintains that separate speciation, all right? Okay, so the last two parts of the scientific name, last two parts of that classification system, the genus and the species, that makes up the scientific name. So just remember, you have to write it in italics. So if you handwrite it, you need to underline it. Okay, that's just a proper way of doing it. Some folks get real picky with that. I'm one of those, so I'm sorry, but I do get picky. So if you handwrite it, you have to underline it. If you type it up, you do it just like how I did it. You put it in italics rather. Okay, and let's see. Oh, capital genus, lowercase species. And okay, let's kind of back up here. Okay, check this out. I'm gonna go back a couple slides. All right. So I said dogs have a scientific name of Canis lupus, right? Whereas foxes belong to Vulpes, so they're related, right? So who would be more closely related? Vulpes rufus, Canis lupus, or Canis latrans? So you look at the ones from the same genus, Canis, and that shows relation. So it's kind of like, I gave it in the homework assignment the other day. My brother's name is John. My name is James. We have the same last name, though. So that's kind of like your genus. The last name, in our case, shows closer relation than like lots of other dudes that have the name James. Okay? Hope that makes a little bit of sense. And again, a dog and a wolf. We've said, what is a dog? A dog is nothing more than a domesticated wolf, all right? And it's kind of funny, right? This is way off topic, but I think it's a little funny where dogs are loved and wolves are hated. There's a little conundrum there, a little historical conundrum. And again, remember how to write a scientific name correctly. If you look at what I put in blue there on the notes, that genus, in this case Escherichia, you can abbreviate it. That's why you hear things like E. coli or T. rex instead of Tyrannosaurus rex. That is acceptable. So if you were abbreviating it, in this case it's capital E period coli or capital T period rex, or in the case of humans, Homo sapiens, capital H period sapiens. All right. A dichotomous key. That's a process of identifying your species, and that goes back to the very first slide here when I had all those oak leaves, if you guys recall. So here's a field guide for wildflowers, and this one kind of arranges them based on color. So you would look, there's a yellow section, a blue section. Then you can start narrowing it down based on what time of year, specifically the month the flower blooms, those types of things. In my classroom, I have field guides for birds and trees and so forth. The birds one that I have is kind of similar. It's also done based on color and then their migration, when you're going to find them in Texas and such. And for modern man, just like we did it with dogs a second ago, you'll have to do this with modern man. So what kingdom do we belong to? Animal. What kingdom? So now we're getting more specific. Chordate. What class? Mammal. Now here's where we kind of diverge from dogs and cats and other mammals. Our order is primates, which includes apes, monkeys, lemurs, humans, and that's going to be a future lesson. We'll get more in detail on primates, all right? What family do we belong to? Humans. Sometimes we use the word hominid. Same for me, that's fine. Same thing, okay? And then from family, we get to Homo sapiens. And our scientific name, if you want to abbreviate it, H period sapiens, like I said a few moments ago. All right? We're on the home stretch here. I just want to remind you, this is something that might kind of shock some of you a little bit, but at one time there were several other species of humans, hominids, that existed. So it's like this. Imagine if I said feline. This is really important. Imagine if I used the word feline and I said, think of a cat. Some of you might say mountain lion. Some of you might say jaguar or leopard or lion or house cat or bobcat or whatever. But check this out. Imagine if all the cats went extinct except for bobcats, right? Well, that's kind of what happened with hominids. There have been other species of humans that have come and gone. And just pardon the pun, we happen to be the last man standing. Okay, so obviously there's a Neanderthal, just for one little example. And kind of getting back to how Linnaeus started this off, we have different species of red oaks throughout the state of Texas. So if you look on the right, on that figure there, you see a green shade that kind of goes through central Texas all throughout the southeastern United States. That is the range for Shumard's red oak. And then the little picture there on the left, that is the Chisos red oak, or Quercus gravacei. That one's found in the mountains of deep west Texas and a few scattered mountains throughout adjacent Mexico. So they're related, right? But they're different species. They wouldn't be able to cross-pollinate each other, which maintains speciation, or being separate species. And here are my wolves. Haha, my wolves. There's these are my favorites. I love these dogs. That's KitKat, the wise and scholarly Chihuahua, and then my playful Prada, my Jack Russell. All right, guys. So like I said, next time around we'll get into primates and some of the earlier origins of humans, and that's about it. I know I talked a lot, guys, but I think you needed this since we've been out on COVID leave and whatnot. So miss you guys. Have a great one. God bless. Bye-bye.